called Music for the Eyes. Many of you might have heard about other kinds of immersive environments. There's been a lot of them, like immersive Van Gogh or Frida or other things. And one of the things at the museum that we were thinking about is, how could we use this different kind of storytelling to engage people in the life and art of Georgia O'Keeffe? So I'm going to actually show a little promo video to give you a sense of what we're talking about before we really dive into behind the scenes. So 1 second here. Let's see if we can get this right. Oh, you know what? I'm not sure if I shared the sound, and that's pretty important. So hold on 1 second. Stop sharing my screen here. So that gives you an idea of what we what we're going to be talking about. So one of the things that we really wanted to get across with this is that we wanted to provide a different kind of experience. So really have a variety of experiences, allow guests to explore non-linearly, and just really evoke a different set of emotions. And with that, you know, I just want to, before we hand it over to Electric Playhouse here, I want to say that this kind of thing can feel, especially a little like, some people wonder if this is if it's honoring the art. And one of the ways that we thought about it is that this is not in exchange for the museum experience, not in exchange for looking at the artwork itself. This is something in addition to, a different way of exploring, and especially for people that might not make it to the museum. So we reached out, or we've worked with Electric Playhouse before, and I'm going to actually hand it over to Brandon Garrett, who is the CEO and co-founder of Electric Playhouse, to kind of tell us a little bit more about what Electric Playhouse is.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Liz. Excited to be here. So prior to Electric Playhouse, I worked as a licensed architect, and I specialized in design and technology, utilizing virtual reality, augmented reality, and just a number of visualization techniques. So Electric Playhouse, in a sense, kind of combined my two passions for building physical space and blending that with digital space. And joining on our team is also Simone Seagle. And she's one of our interactive developers. She's a creative technologist, and she actually has a background in physics, computer science, and art. And so I think having that passion and history, and she also has history of working with various museums, she just made her a perfect fit for the project. And she's going to actually be discussing a lot of the kind of behind the scenes and process throughout this presentation here. So with that, I guess the big idea about Electric Playhouse is that, you know, we really see the building as the next big media platform. And so we accomplish that through a combination of projection mapping and sensors that track your movement through the space. And we use that combination to turn the walls and floors and just to a variety of different types of interactive surfaces. And so as a digital platform, we actually change the types of content that you actually experience with the click of a button. And so much like a TV, we picture our space and that programming changing throughout the day. And so in addition to like music for the eyes, for example, our programming can range from games and activities in the daytime to full immersive 5-course interactive dinners in the evening. And even later night, we'll do concerts and a wide variety of special events throughout the facility. And the building itself, if you jump to the axon, we can kind of show just the size of the location. And so the actual location's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we took over an old Staples building. And so it's about a 24,000 square foot space. And within there, we have about 16 different interactive spaces. And that also includes a bar and cafe. And so we think that combination allows for exploration. And then having the F&B component also allows for us to, design specialty drinks and just take these types of experiences to a whole nother level of immersion throughout the space. And, one advantage to having a larger space like this as well is that it's just not one big single room that you walk into. And so creatively, when we approach projects like this, we can look at all these different variety of spaces within there and then start to think of, how to activate those individually and then create kind of a collective cohesive experience from that point moving forward. Oh, Liz, you're muted.
Of course I am. Years in, right? So one of the things when we started working, when the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum team and the Electric Playhouse team started working together, is we really started thinking about mapping the spaces here. And one of the things that we thought was really important was to have a variety of experiences, as I mentioned, and that there was this orientation experience, so that when someone came in, so this is the entrance over here, and there's this signature hallway portal that people walk through, is that there's like this experience that actually tells a little more of a narrative story with immersives before heading into the more choose your own adventure. So I'm gonna have Brandon, do you want to talk a little bit about, actually, sorry about that. I wanted to show a little bit about how we came to the theme. One of the things that we came to is really thinking about how do we focus in on Georgia O'Keeffe's inspiration and art practice. We started with the art practice, and then that so led to her words and her philosophies were so we're so tied into that. So we kind of went in that way. So I'm going to actually show a little bit of that here. You would think I'm not the curated digital experience the way I'm, let me just go here. We're just going to show a little bit. This is a way of showing an interactive that one of the Electric Playhouse, an immersive that one of the someone at the Electric Playhouse made, and but with the theme. So I'm going to show a little bit of this. So that is where we got the actual theme. This is actually that that animation in space at the Electric Playhouse. So I was talking about this orientation experience, and here we wanted to have some text so you had something to go in. And this is a little bit different than what you've done at the Playhouse before, right, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, in our past experience, we kind of just allowed people to enter the facility unguided. And so, we felt it was missing an opportunity to at least provide some background on the artists and especially their process. And this type of introduction that we worked with in collaboration with the museum lasts about 13 minutes or so. And it's not just a video that you watch, but it also provided opportunity to allow us to start to introduce some of those interactive elements. And so one, it provided education on how the building is actually going to react to them, and that background on the artist that we felt was really important before that kind of creative self-exploration that occurs essentially after that. And I think the other advantage to, doing it like this is that it allowed us to kind of pool people together before the experience, where in the past kind of individuals or smaller groups would just trickle in and then they'd kind of walk around. But we felt by kind of curating and controlling that, collecting that group of people, that you actually get this great energy. You start to see how others are reacting in that shared experience. And it really does build a lot of excitement and anticipation, and just provides, I think, a really good foundation for that exploration that follows, where after that guided experience, they could just freely walk and explore all of those different areas that we have presented earlier.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. So one of the things you'll notice, we also, in our museum, we have a commitment to producing everything in Spanish and English. So we kept to that commitment as part of this experience. We have chapters so that people understand like where they are in the process to kind of know how long it will be. And we anchor a lot on her words. So her words are just so powerful. I found things that I could say things with color and shapes that I couldn't say in any other way, things I had no words for. So really talking about how she was honing her artistic craft in order to be able to communicate in the way that she felt she was made to communicate. This is a picture of the specials, which comes right after that quote, where this was actually the first things that were in her first exhibition in 1917. And there's some movement in that room. So one of the things we also had a commitment to is that since we're showing things large, since things can be cropped and zoomed into, is that we have in that orientation room a inspiration wall. So the rest of the immersive space is any artwork that is used on the inspiration wall. We have the works that are featured so that someone can look back and forth and see what is the actual full size of that work. So in these chapters, I'll just go ahead and read this because her words are just so great. And I know we have O'Keeffe fans on here. It was like the ocean, but it was wide, wide land. The evening star would be high in the sunset sky when it was still broad daylight. That evening star fascinated me. I had nothing but to walk into nowhere and into the wide sunset space with the star.
And O'Keeffe has a series of these pieces that feature the evening star that all have kind of a similar color palette. And we wanted to include that in our space and also kind of use that as a jumping off point for where we start to explore the interactivity. So one thing you're going to see here, as these people are walking around, you can see how watercolor creates that incredible texture that you really just can't get any other way. And in order to honor that and sort of bring it to the foreground, one of my colleagues created this animation that you can see on the left there, where he actually used a paper that was written by Pixar that simulates the physics and chemistry of how the watercolor pigments travel through the water to create that sort of bleeding, feathering effect. And we have that on the floor so that people begin to see how we use the message and the medium in order to bring interactivity in.
And I think that's really one of the things that we really wanted to add to this over some of the immersives that we've experienced, is have that how can guests actually engage with these processes? I'd never lived up so high before and was so excited that I began talking about trying to paint New York. I was told that it was an impossible idea. Even the men hadn't done too well with it.
Another fascinating series that Georgia O'Keeffe has are these sets of skyscraper paintings, and they're all really, really cool. There's a whole bunch of them. It's definitely worth looking them up. And they all kind of have a similar commonality in their tone. And then also you may notice their aspect ratio, which means they're a whole lot taller than they are wide. So we wanted to take this part of her life and create an experience about it. However, long, tall skyscraper pictures won't quite fit in our horizontal room. So this is one of the pieces where we created kind of a merged animation that is a combination of these skyscrapers to build them together into a skyline type of experience. And this is sort of a combination of something we call generative art, where we take the pixels and we actually sort of draw them from scratch. So you can see that in the clouds and the windows on this little snippet of the animation itself. The windows come in and out so that you can sort of imagine that there's people inside of them, and then the clouds are moving in the background. But the skyline itself is built from her original buildings. And this is what it looks like in space. And one of the wonderful emergent things that happened is when we projected this on the walls, we noticed that the floor was just reflective enough to create this almost like a water-like reflection on the floor, which was not planned and turned out beautifully. And part of the process is also, using some restraint. So originally we had talked about having something on the floor, but anything that we would project on the floor would wind up taking away from this effect. And I think it's important. And also I think it honors the vibrance of a city, right? So it's got this planned nature, but it's also random. And every time that this runs, it looks a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's one of the things in building a process like this. You can do a ton of interactivity and project on every surface, but just making sure that in any case, we've kind of made those decisions of what that is. And that was really a collaboration together. So it's great. So that's a little taster of some of what you one would see in the orientation space. And then, as we pointed out before, once you get beyond that, you're kind of in the exploration spaces. And Simone and I are going to talk about just a few of the ones in here. I'll hand it over to you, Simone.
All right. So as Brandon was saying, when you have a big space like this, a big building like this that has a whole bunch of little spaces, there's a lot of work that goes into brainstorming how we're going to handle all these different spaces. And as we were going through together, one day the curator, Ariel, saw this space and he saw that, you see those, there's nets hanging in front of it to protect people who are eating from, and I don't know, shoes or whatever that might fly at them. And he thought that it really reminded him of fishing nets. And he said, oh, what would be perfect in here? What about we turn this into kind of a Hawaii themed thing? Because Georgia O'Keeffe had a series of paintings that she did in Hawaii, which sounded like an awesome idea to us. And, not being a Georgia O'Keeffe expert myself, I did what anybody would do. And I Googled Georgia O'Keeffe in Hawaii. All right. So this is kind of like a behind the scenes look of how do we come up with these sorts of ideas? And you can see that there's a few different themes that emerge. I really love her paintings of bromeliads. But if you have a space like that, it almost lends itself better to kind of a landscape sort of treatment. And as I was going through her catalog of work, I started noticing that there is a series of paintings that she did of the Io Valley. And you'll notice that these are actually in different places and they're different sizes, right? But as you line them up, it's almost like I didn't have to do any work because they're lined up perfectly. That almost creates this one seamless panorama that we can use in that space that has one long wall and one short one. So we can have the water featured on one side and then this landscape featured on the other. And so I took those 3 paintings and I merged them together with just a little bit of Photoshop to touch up the color palette so that they would look consistent, and then just sort of blend the edges a little bit, while still, you know, trying my best to honor the original work. And then after that, I added subtle animations like the clouds in the background, the rolling mountain mist, the waving tree, and the water flowing down the waterfalls.
And one of the things that we hope with these imagined landscapes is that it really then does pique your interest. What did the work look like? What does the original work look like? So even though it's strange to kind of put these together, that's really the hope, that seeing something move, that you might notice the clouds more than you would if they weren't gently floating, or the tree that's floating around. And do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening on the floor here?
Sure. So this animation, or it's kind of like a model, these kind of things, animation and computer programs sort of blend together. So on the floor is this interactive model where you walk around, and it's like you're kicking around black sand that she had talked about in Hawaii. And then there's also kind of a surf animation. So it really ties the room together. And it also, we included basically like ambient surf sounds that were done by our sound engineer, that has kind of like a whooshing wave. So it really feels like you're there. And
I actually have a video of this off of Instagram of a visitor. So I'm going to show that just to get so that you get a better sense of what the floor looks like there. So let me get to QuickTime. This is from Brian Wang. Now, this floor is actually interacting to his feet going through the surface. Is responding to his feet. So thanks to our Instagram people for that. And lest we think that Simone is always looking at really beautiful things all day, I just wanted to show, I'm not sure what interactive this is from, but often when we're on the floor at Electric Playhouse, this is what some of the developers are working with. So we promise behind the scenes. So this is way behind the scenes.
yeah,
so,
this
we'll move on from that very quickly.
Yeah, that was the actual code of the floor. And it was 2 incredibly powerful simulations running one on top of each other. It was not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. So starting in around 1923, O'Keeffe began making small canvas colored cards that she'd use as visual references in composing her paintings. We have some of these on display in our research center up in Santa Fe. I should point out, for some of you who aren't that don't know New Mexico geography, that where the museum is in Santa Fe is about an hour away from Electric Playhouse in Albuquerque. So we have some of these on display in the research center at the museum, but it gave the Electric Playhouse team some ideas.
Yeah, we got pretty excited when we saw those color cards, because being kind of this like mixture of like math, science, and art nerds all together, this was an obvious kind of an inlet into data science of the color palettes of these kind of things. There's been a lot of interesting work done by some other developers / artists analyzing the color palettes of famous pieces of art that are really interesting. And that was our jumping off point, where we wanted to take these pieces where we know the exact paints that she used, because they were they were cataloged, and we worked with museum staff to select a few different paintings, and they found the exact color swatches that matched. And I thought it was a really cool way of sort of pulling together her beautiful and distinctive kind of New Mexico color palettes and allowing people to, in a sort of a playful way, explore the colors that went into these works of art. So
Because
as
when you move in front of it, it pulls out the colors in the cards. So it kind of is a circular experience.
right.
And I want to do a shout out for our conservator, Dale Cronkite, who pulled these together. They're not exactly the exact, because we don't know exactly which cards she used for what. She definitely used these cards to inspire. And so we were, Dale was looking at the cards and what might have been. So I want to just draw back a little on that. We know that she used these cards to be inspired, much like if you go to the paint shop and see which paints, and she called them my colors. But they weren't recipes, and we don't actually know if she was looking at that, but we can see what her colors were. So I just wanted to put a little museum-y spin on that as well. That's why it's great to collaborate.
Right. Another kind of emergent thing with all these different spaces is we have this one area that we call the ball courts, and it has an incredibly high ceiling, and it's a kind of a long, skinny room. It's almost, kind of think about it like movie theater screen type, right? And so normally during the day we have games where people are kind of throwing balls at the wall, which is a lot of fun. But I wanted to kind of bring a different feel in there. And one thing is, I was going through the catalog, is there's like a series of paintings that include this kind of vibrant blue New Mexico sky, and it pulls through different things. So like this one in particular is showing the moon through a pelvic bone. And it's really cool because there's a lot of different foregrounds where this is happening. But I wanted to create something that was sort of like a hybrid of a video and a program, where you would see these in kind of like a subtle, very slow motion. So we kind of sometimes call this room the slow looking room, because it creates sort of this peaceful atmosphere where things are moving slowly, and it's supposed to evoke kind of like a feeling of awe. And I love that quote that goes along with it.
Yeah, to see takes time, like to have a friend takes time. George O'Keeffe talks a lot about taking time to looking closer, that kind of thing. But I feel like this quote is just so beautiful when you think about her process and her approach to this kind of thing. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about how you thought about adding interaction here.
Right. So that was originally part of the plan. As we were going through this, I thought, we should have interactivity everywhere, because that's what we do at Electric Playhouse. And when I built this animation, I put it up on the wall, and we walked in and everyone just got like super quiet and just watched it, I realized that anything that I would add in terms of interactivity to this would just take away from the experience altogether, rather than adding to it. So, we were very careful to make sure we treated the art with respect, rather than kind of going overboard in our treatment.
And so one of the other things that came out of this, and this is again part of the iterative process, is that here this room, which is usually balls being thrown at walls, totally fun. It has a separateness to it. And when it had this slow moving, when we saw the first prototype, it really gave that sense of that. But then what did we need to do to reinforce that? Well, not add interaction, but also, since in the main spaces, there's the cafe, there are people, there is a soundtrack, that then we thought, well, we need to even take it a little bit further, so that our sound designer actually did an original composition for this room, so that it again takes all of those sensory components and tries to make it feel like you've gone away when you go in this room, which is adjacent to other rooms. But I think we tried to do that a lot, especially in those larger spaces. Like if it was a slower, and this goes to our desire to create a series of emotional experiences on this journey, is that really adding, like thinking through all of the components, whether how fast is the movement, what is the interaction, what is the emotional component, which we actually mapped out so that we could see that we had different things. And then how do we like lean into that with all of the senses? So within this case, not adding interaction, adding a soundtrack, which is very ambient, that kind of maybe one wouldn't even notice that there is sound in that room, but it will actually be there so that it kind of starts taking you away from the hustle and bustle of the space outside of that. And there's a few places like that. The animation that I showed early with our theme has the music. So that's a little a dancing thing. And I've heard from guests that they saw families dancing in there. So that's another emotional thing. Or we have a skull interactive that we have a subtle sound in that area just because it's kind of a slower one. So I think one of these things is knowing what to take out of the experience and what to add to the experience when you're trying to evoke a certain kind of emotional reaction, whether that be play, fun, slowing down, that kind of thing. Would you agree, Simone?
Yes, and I think it's important that allowing for all these different kinds of scales of interaction and feelings of interaction allows people to explore and stay longer with what interests them the most, rather than having one experience that's almost like a movie, because we handle that with the orientation, which is a shorter and manageable amount of time. But then the other places allow you to kind of focus on more of what inspires you.
Yeah. So those are just a few examples of the experience in the exploration spaces. I want to say that we've gotten some nice local press, so we're pretty excited about that. Definitely want to do a huge shout out for our supporters at the Albuquerque Journal. This is a really great article that gets into some of the processes, especially from the larger team and from our director, of why we want to experiment with this kind of thing and what we're really learning from it. So want to thank our the press sponsors. And I would be remiss to not say that this is definitely a huge team effort. So, and even what's great is that with this partnership, we had already worked with Electric Playhouse. They had a team, we had a team. So we could actually put this together. We weren't starting from zero. We're bringing a lot of experience to the table. And I've kind of said that it was a little bit like a Exquisite Corpse. If some of you know that game, the Surrealist game, where someone draws one part of it and then someone draws the next part without knowing, and it all coming together, so that this hopefully I believe that between what we came up with at the George O'Keeffe Museum from our knowledge of George O'Keeffe, with the kind of creative aspects of the full team here at Electric Playhouse, that really in the end we're more than the sum of our parts, because we can really, and of course then we also hired a music and sound and title and graphics. So really trying to get this larger team so that we come up with something that we couldn't do ourselves. And I'll just point out, because I know that we have a lot of time, I guess I talked a little too fast. that this is a selfie station. So this is actually another of the experiences. And one of the great parts about this is that this is actually featuring a piece from our archive. So when Georgia O'Keeffe went to Taos with Rebecca Salisbury James in 1929, they took this tintype, and we have this tintype in our archive. And so we wanted to show that because it's really cool. And then it also makes a selfie station so that someone here can take an animated GIF and send it to a friend or put it on their social media so that they get their own tintype from the Electric Playhouse. One thing that we want to also offer is that anyone on this call, we're going to be actually offering a discount code if you are in the area and want to stop by. And I know that we have some help for someone to add that to the chat so that for about a week after this, there's a discount code if you will want to visit. Anything else to add, Brandon or Simone?
No, I think just the collaboration was just so fun working with the Georgia O'Keeffe team. And to us, it really allowed our team, who kind of specializes in immersive experience, to work with such experts at the O'Keeffe Museum. And I think their ability to create and design just really rich experiences, I think, was exciting for us. And in the end, I think our hope is that that blend of a carefully curated experience with the incorporation of those interactive elements is just going to give fans of O'Keeffe a new way to hopefully appreciate the art even further, and then really introduce the works to a whole new generation of fans is our hope.
Yeah, and I thought it was a really, really fun project to work on. And I loved the experience of being able to take her beautiful and varied pieces of art and create them at all, recreate them at all sort of different scales and interactivity levels, and you know, bring it to life in a really fun way. It was great.
Great. Well, Chicle, do we have some questions?
Well, first of all, that was awesome. Thank you so much. I was lucky enough to be able to go just this past week to finally go see the show. And it was, I mean, I was expecting something really cool. And I mean, I was still surprised by how cool it was. I hadn't been to the Electric Playhouse yet. And seeing it in the way that it was presented, I mean, huge kudos. Like, that was really awesome. So like, yeah, if anybody has a chance, if you're in New Mexico and you get a chance to travel down to Albuquerque to go check it out, it is super worth it. So huge kudos, Simone, Brandon, Liz, for getting this amazing show together. It really was very impactful. I also was going to share a bunch of videos because, of course, it's so like, you want to pull out your phone and record as much as you can. The music room was my favorite one. I could have like hung out and had some coffee there for a while. So thank you so much for that. There are a lot of questions rolling in. It seems like folks were waiting until it was almost over to start. We went from like 4 to now we're at 17. So I'm going to parse through and see which ones I can pick out. I don't think that we might have enough time to answer all of these, but I also wanted to point out in the chat, I did drop a special gift from the O'Keeffe Museum where you'll be able to get a discount using this code at the Electric Playhouse. So if you haven't been able to go check it out, you can check this out. You can check out the code that is in the chat right now. You'll be able to use that, get some money off, go check out this amazing show. If you don't see that in the chat for whatever reason, please let me know. I'm happy to repost it. But maybe let me start picking out some of these questions really quick. One of them is a compliment. It says, I'm wondering if Georgia O'Keeffe ever gave thought to the presentation of her works, and I'd bet she'd embrace this wholly with a fun reaction. Kind of a question, kind of a comment. I don't know if you all have anything to maybe say back to that.
I'll speak to that. I think that she definitely had a lot. I mean, she definitely had a lot of thoughts about how her work was displayed. And we look at that a lot. We also talk about it a lot at the museum because it was how her work was displayed at the time that she was around and at the time of the way that artwork was presented at that time. So I think that we'll never know exactly what she would think. What I do know is that she was creative, she was innovative, she was an experimenter. She really, we know because we have her we manage her to historic homes, that she loved the new gadgets. She really liked trying those things. So it's really fun to think about like what she would be thinking about in a world like today, because she was not, she was really into quality things. So she cared what things looked like. She cared about that intentionality around everything that she did. And so I hope, and that's why it was great to work with Electric Playhouse, because we had worked together before. And from the minute that I met them, which was back in 2019, I was very impressed with their artistic direction and with all of the things that they put together. And so that was really important, because not always do you get a technology firm that has such a great like aesthetic that I could really get behind. And so we had a lot of trust that was built up from that. So we'll never know, but we can also think that, well, she had these qualities. And so how do we use creativity to hopefully inspire other people to be creative, especially with those quotes, not only if you're an artist, but just your persistence for trying to hone your language in whatever medium, or whether that's music, art, project management, whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. I can also say that one of the things that struck me when I went to go visit her house in Albuquerque is that was her sound system. She had like this amazing sound system set up, and she would scratch in like where her levels were expected to be at all times. So she was really like, she knew what she was doing, and she was very precise with that. I thought that was so funny. There were so many like wrinkles to her personality, you know. So this next question is has to do, I think it has more like a question to do with accessibility. So how have the creators and engineers accommodated those of us with balance issues who need to visually stabilize in order to withstand and stand in the exciting environment created?
I have something to say with that, but do you all want to take it?
Well, one thing I can say, since a lot of times I also develop games for Electric Playhouse, we are very careful about anything that's moving on the floor, because it is very disorienting, whether you know, even if you don't have balance issues. And we always test things to make sure that we're not throwing people off, but that is something that we definitely think about, and we're very careful. So things do not move very quickly on the walls, nor do they move quickly on the floor. So, and there's also places to sit down. So I think that, you know, we try and make it as safe as possible.
Yeah, and the Playhouse was, and this probably had a lot to do with it being designed fairly recently, is highly accessible. You know, it's one level. The byways are pretty wide, so in terms of for anyone using a chair, we did add seating to especially to the 13-minute experience, because 13 minutes can be a lot of time. And luckily the interaction actually goes over the chairs, which was another kind of cool feature, because it goes 3D over it. So that if you're moving on the chair, the wheat will move when windmills are spinning. The paint will kind of go over that. So so we made sure to have chairs there, and then in the cafe there's always a place to rest there. I know that some of the ideas that we came up with at the museum, Electric Playhouse came back to us and said, yeah, that might make people not well, because we're like, we want a record on the floor. And so it was great to have your all experience on what would work and wouldn't. And then again, yeah, prototyping it in space, the sand and the surf in the room with the inspired by her Hawaii time. We kind of like worked back and forth. At one point it was all surf, and one of our teammates had to walk out because they were like, whoa, that's a lot. And so, but the sand wasn't enough, right? And so kind of getting that balance. So in terms of other accessibility features, we have QR codes and a website that has all of the text and all of the artworks that are used. And that, with the hope of that being that if you could use a screen reader, or if it's something that you want to revisit because it's a lot to absorb in one space, that actually serves that purpose. That also shows each work that's in it. It has the Spotify playlist that we use in the space. And the last thing I'll say is also, when we are thinking about the different kinds of that of sensory experiences, like adding sound, like interaction, like you know, the color and everything, really thinking about that the more senses is the more people will gravitate to the senses that are most alive for them, and that goes for anyone. So those are the kind of things that we've thought about in terms of accessibility.
Thank you, Liz. A couple of more questions that keep coming up. I'm going to bunch these together. I think they kind of go together. Number one, which is, how long is the show running for? And is it going to be traveling at all?
I thought Brandon was talking there. You're muted, Brandon. The current show will be running through November 27th. And we can get into what those hours are if we want to get specific. So November 27th, we are already looking at, can we, you know, have some special nights, especially over the Christmas holiday, because a lot of people have said, but my parents want to see it, they're going to be here. So we'll be looking at things like that. Since Electric Playhouse is so flexible, we are talking about like how there could be special showings later on after that, especially for school groups and things like that. So more to learn about that. As far as traveling, one of the things, one of the great parts of this partnership is that Electric Playhouse had the space and had all of the projectors up, and so had all of the sensors in place, which of course makes it a lot less expensive than building out your own space. So I think these are things we are going to talk about. Brandon is working on building a new space in Las Vegas. So I think one of the things we'll talk about is, does this make sense there? You want to talk about your plans, Brandon?
Yeah, as a company, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we see ourselves as just a big media platform. And so we're expanding that platform with kind of a flagship opening right on the Las Vegas Strip, which will be next summer. But kind of taking that one step further, we have an actual Electric Playhouse Travels exhibit that's kind of been jumping through various museums, and it landed in the Michigan Science Center right now. Currently, that one's programming to more of our games and STEAM focused, but being the platform it's designed that any type of content that we actually develop could be ported to any of those platforms in that footprint. So I think the future is bright for, you know, looking at additional opportunities to experience music for the eyes throughout the country.
Yeah, so I guess that's a non-answer of let's wait and see.
Awesome. So let me see, I'm gonna pick out a couple more questions for this. It looks like somebody has a question about the music. I know that you talked a little bit about the music that was composed specifically for this, but yeah, I guess it seems like folks were maybe just wondering or maybe wanting to get a little more information on that, what that, excuse me, what that process looked like, and anything maybe to do with that music.
Well, I'm going to give a huge shout out to the Frida Immersive done by Coco Lab in Mexico City. We some of us were able to see that, and I think that one thing that we probably already knew, but it really enforced, was that one thing that made that was just they actually just had an amazing soundtrack that really worked on. Now, it was less of an interactive, it was more of a like a 360 movie experience, but as we reflected on that, sound was such a huge role. And they had, for that experience, they did custom music with all female artists from Mexico. So that was just really inspiring. So once we saw that, because we had been kind of working on some of the prototypes for already working on the prototypes for the music for the eyes, and of course there's music in the title. So we with all of that, we realized that it was maybe a little beyond our own skill sets, even to that we needed some some deeper help to make sure that we used music in a way that was most impactful. So we actually worked with a contractor that Electric Playhouse has worked with a lot, and actually who did the sound in our Seeing Beyond the Clouds and the Wind, or did the wind. And so Chris Alvarez came in, and we started talking about how music could really reinforce this. And so especially for the orientation experience, like how do you express New York as opposed to how do you express windmills and how do you express flowers? So he was really helpful, because also how do you express that within 30 seconds, because with 13 minutes, we're changing the sound and the feel 5 times. So he really helped us with that. And again, on the, and I'll share the link to the playlist for that, because also thinking about like, we have the final immersive in that room is a accumulation of landscapes that it feels like you're flying over the landscapes in there. And so for that, we just thought about, well, how do we, and so we ended up using a Robert Mirabel piece, because that's an artist out of Taos Pueblo. And so really contemporary, but also, you know, of the land that's been here and the inspiration this land has given to many. As that fades into this final quote of that, she's been like, where O'Keeffe says, I've been terrified all of my life, but I've never let that stop me from doing anything. So so that was quite a process of what the immersives were doing with the Electric Playhouse team, what we were trying to do with the storytelling, what we felt like really evoked the feeling, and then worked on just a playlist for the regular space, made sure there was plenty of Bjork in there. And just like playful, but little ambiance, still had that like there's a jazz kind of undertone to this, especially woody instruments, which was great with Bjork's new album. And then you know, kind of then those other spaces, like what was the feel, so they could be more ambient. I don't know if anyone else was involved in the music as much, if you want to have anything to add. I think it really adds a lot when you look at the 13 minutes is a whole heck of a long time without music. And it really, it really needed all of the elements. It needed the anchor in the quotes to kind of say, well, why am I looking at this? It needed the immersive and the interaction. It needed the inspiration so you could see where's this all coming from? And then music off of it. So really, without any of those elements, it just doesn't feel like it's right. So.
Thank you, Liz. We're coming up on about 2 or 3 minutes left. There's kind of a fun question that I think is kind of interesting. Does the presentation, or does it include a sense of smell? Or has the Electric Playhouse played with smell at all in the past?
Not intentionally. We do a wide variety of kind of dining. We have a full-time chef, and we've loosely discussed the possibility of actually combining the O'Keeffe experience with one of our immersive dining experiences. I've been told there's a recipe book that exists, but whether it's palatable to most is questionable. Liz could probably expand on kind of what we've talked about there, but we did incorporate some fun kind of cocktails and stuff because, for especially those evening crowds, it's just a great, new type of gallery experience, and we want people to spend some time and enjoy it.
I love the idea of sound. I think sound or smell and temperature, really fun things to add. I think it's also like would be easier in an immersive dining room than in a more open space. So, and you need to be really careful. I'm sure that some of our attendees have used sound or smell, have used smell, and you've got to get it right, because if you don't get it right, it can really turn some people off. But I think that's a great place to expand upon. I think that one of the things we learn is just like what are the different ways that we can push, and I'm sure that Electric Playhouse is thinking about that all of the time as well.
Well, Liz, Simone, Brandon, thank you so much. We are coming up on 10 a.m. So for folks that that were able to join us today, thank you so much. You will be getting an email from me in about in a few days, which will hold a lot of the information that I've been sharing here. I am also going to share the code, the unique code that you can use to get a discount to be able to get some tickets to go to the Electric Playhouse and check this out, check this exhibition out. I'm also going to drop it in the chat one more time right now. We did record this, so this recording will be made available probably within about a week, and you'll get an email. If you registered for this, you'll get an email with that link, but it's also going to be put up on our website, so you'll be able to watch it anytime. So again, thank you so much. Simone, Brandon, Liz, great talking to you all, and have a great day. Thank you all.
Thanks everyone. Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.